Hola, welcome to 20 by 20, a new to you thing that I've decided to do here on the channel. This channel is called Unlimited Bits Gaming, I know, or UBG for short, so naturally its main focus is video games. But sometimes I get the itch to make content regarding other topics that might not be related to gaming, such as pro wrestling. I've been a fan of pro wrestling pretty much my whole life. I just didn't realize it until March of 2006 when I saw a triple threat match on Raw featuring Triple H, Rob Van Dam, and The Big Show. Ever since then, I've been mostly hooked, learning some wrestling history, and I've watched most of what's happened in the past 13 years. With that brief introduction said and done, I thought I'd do a video on TLC, WWE's most recent pay-per-view offering. Everyone and their mother has covered this event by now, as it's Wednesday as I write and put all of this together, so 9 days after the event happened. There's been 2 SmackDown shows since then, and I plan to watch last night's later today once I finish producing this video. With that said, let's get into what and I bet plenty of people, thought about the show. The pay-per-view kicked off with a mixed match challenge finals, of which I hadn't kept up with because it didn't interest me just like the first season didn't interest me, so this matchup was news to me. And I wasn't aware of the Royal Rumble stipulation, so that was a nice little surprise for me once the match was over. For what it was, I thought it was a decent start to a show I've always thought as a good one in past years. It's amazing to see that R-Truth, being somewhere in his mid or late 40s, still looking the same as he did a decade ago and still getting in there and jumping and throwing kicks and speeding his ass off like he's Crash Bandicoot. And I became a fan of Carmella during her run with the SmackDown Women's title, so I didn't mind the match starting it all off. Never been too big on Jinder and definitely never on Alicia Fox, regardless of how long she's been in the company, but that's a story for another time. The match was fine, R-Truth and Carmella picked up the victory, and now they will be the number 30 entrants in their respective Royal Rumble matches. Which is all well and good. What are the odds that either of them will win theirs? Not likely, I don't think, but one can never say never, I suppose. We've all been swerved and surprised before. Following that first match, the triple threat tag team match between champions The Bar, the Usos, and New Day took place. I don't think it was a surprise to anyone that this match went as smoothly and as good as it went, since all these teams have been working with each other for years now, and they're all just that damned good. However, I only thought that the match was fine because I found myself wishing for it to have been more. Bubba Ray Dudley was recently on the Jim Ross Report, Jim Ross's podcast in case you don't know of it, and he expressed that this triple threat tag match should have been a TLC match. He said so because, having been a part of the original TLC matches that are considered classics and legendary by many, he has an idea of what he's talking about. So he explained that if any team since the Dudleys, Hardys, and ENC could match or even top those classic matches, that it would be these 3 teams. So I listened to that, and I was left wanting more. As I mentioned a moment ago, no one was surprised that their normal triple threat match was good. The problem was just that it was just good, but it wasn't historic like it could have been if it would have had that stipulation. So being a fan, I can't tell you much about what it's like to be in the ring, or about ring psychology, or what it's like to sit down and pitch ideas to Vince McMahon, but what I do know is that this match left a lot of potential on the table. And next we have the whole Baron Corbin and Braun Strowman business. About 6 months ago, I felt majorly burned out on WWE's wrestling, so I decided to take a break from it and didn't return to it until just a month ago with SmackDown. And what brought me back is Becky Lynch and, now that she's being featured again, Asuka. What made me stop watching Raw and the product as a whole was stuff like Corbin vs. Strowman. I think a lot of people out there would agree with me in saying that Corbin's role as general manager has been, well, shit, pretty much. And I can say that just by going on Twitter and reading people's comments on them. Raw has been in the dumps for so long now that the McMahons and Triple H returned to Raw recently to make some announcements to try to improve the show, but until I start seeing that people say Raw is watchable again, I want nothing to do with it. And with this little anti-Raw rant out of the way, back to Corbin and Strowman. Strowman still wasn't clear to compete, still having his arm in a sling and all, but he still came out and had Balor, Gable, Rude, and others surround the ring and gang up on Corbin with steel chairs. Which would have been a good little payoff, I think, if the story really mattered. But as things stand, the whole thing just wasn't good at all, and I didn't really care about this part of the show. This rings even more true for me, seeing as basically the same thing seemed to have happened again the following night on Raw, and the regurgitation of matches and segments has been one of Raw's most offensive features for years now. Up next in the show was Natalya versus Ruby Riott with her squad with her in a tables match. And I hate to say it, but just like the tag triple threat, this story and this match could have been way more important and have had way more meaning than it did. Here you have the heels doing something as despicable as mocking a recently deceased father of someone else, that someone being Natalya, by the way, and the crowd was mostly dead for it. But that seemed to be the theme of the night. Match after match, the crowd was mostly dead for it all. This one wasn't an exception to that. In a perfect world, this feud would have had a white-hot build-up, especially since Natalya has been in the company for so long and is basically wrestling royalty, but because damn near the entirety of her run has been presented so poorly, I honestly could not bring myself to care. In the match, Natalya took out Morgan and Logan on her own and ultimately defeated Riott for the not-so-major payoff, and that was that. But one last thing before we move on. The Riott Squad walked out with a table that had a decal of Jim Neidhart on it to continue to mock and disrespect Natalya and her family, right? But something happened in the match that just really put me off of it all. Riott had a table with her father on it that she planned to put her through, but it also just so happened that by pure coincidence, Natalya had also put a table with a decal of Riott under the ring, almost as if this whole story and payoff had been planned beforehand. So she could try to mock her the same way. So if I had been really into the match, this would have taken me completely out of it for sure. So by far, I would say that the worst offender of this show was this match, because it was so cruelly uninteresting when it should have been so much more, and because of this little detail that was anything but little. Anyway, moving on. Finn Balor vs. Drew McIntyre was a damn good show. Since I haven't been watching Raw in 6 months, I haven't been following this or any other story very closely, but I was immediately interested in this one because I know how good both men are. And sure enough, they worked their asses off and put on a hell of a show. McIntyre, being the much bigger of the two, dominated most of the match as he believably should have, and that's what made the match as good as it was. Balor was definitely the underdog, and he made us root for him and keep hoping that somehow, someway, he'd be able to overcome and win. And so he did, but he didn't do it alone, since Ziggler distracted and attacked McIntyre when they were outside of the ring, but Drew took him out with one big blow. Balor took advantage once he went back in, and managed to get the victory. Again, just a damn good match, and this continues the story between all three men, especially since Dolph went apeshit on Balor backstage after Balor confronted him. Good stuff. Unfortunately for me, though, the theme of meaning more than it should continues here with Rey Mysterio versus Randy Orton in a chairs match. Here you have two of the greatest performers of the modern era, living legends that are still going at it after years and years of doing what they do so well, but even though I've come back to SmackDown, not everything is all rainbows and sunshine. Again, this is a case of a story not being as good as it should be, because although I'd like to be into it, I'm just not. Something about it all just puts me off, and to be honest, I'm not sure what it is. Randy's been a vicious villain for a number of months now, and he did a very villainous thing in trying to rip Ray's mask off on top of all the other things that he did to him. It's great to have Ray back in the WWE where the world can see him again, though, by the way. Maybe it was a chair stipulation. Maybe it handicapped them, limiting the story that they could tell on there. I'm not sure. All I know is that it didn't click with me, and although I love the splash that Ray did on Randy with the chair when he was out on the floor, as well as how Ray creatively stole the match, ensuring that the feud will continue, I was mostly uninterested in this one. What I definitely was interested in, though, was the Raw Women's title match. At least I was once the match got going, because in all honesty, prior to it, I didn't care too much for it. Not watching a show for a while can do that to you. And I've never been the biggest of Nia Jax fans, so the only reason I had interest in this one was because of Ronda. But boy, once the match got going, both women put on a show. I said that Balor was an underdog earlier, and Ronda was in a similar situation here, though not exactly the same. As talented as Balor is, he's not a legitimate fighter that Ronda was and still can be, and she showed it by winning the match and doing things like that vicious-looking knee strike. And not only did she win the match, she won it by submission. So it was a definitive victory and a dominant, hard-fought one, and it's evident that Ronda's moving on to other things, seeing as she interfered in the SmackDown Women's title match later on in the night. Awesome stuff, and possibly even my favorite match of the show. As I'm writing this, now that I think about it, This show was like a repeat of this year's WrestleMania. Once again, it seems that Ronda might have participated in the match of the night, and this time she did it one-on-one, without the presence and physical aid of two legendary performers. So what does that say about her? And about Nia Jax, too. Furthermore, if that might have been the match of the night, the moment of the night could have been when Becky got in Nia's face after the match backstage, and he just viciously kicks and slaps her, knocking her down and walking away with purpose. Wow! That is why I'm tuning into SmackDown again. The man is serious business. Daniel Bryan successfully retained his title against AJ Styles in what was a great match that the crowd, once more, wasn't really all that into. By this point, I was pretty tired and honestly mostly bored because I had tuned in just for the women's TLC match, and giving most of the show a chance didn't turn out so well for me. Once more, just like in the case of Randy vs. Ray, here you have two killer talents that are some of the best in the world at what they do, and I found myself not caring all that much. Maybe it was the tiredness and boredom. Maybe it was that I felt that most of the prior matches weren't very memorable. Maybe the stories weren't great. Maybe it was a combination of all those things. Whatever the case, I watched the whole match but wasn't surprised by the outcome, and I can't say I'm too big a fan of the new Daniel Bryan. But I suppose that's the point. A heel is traditionally supposed to not be liked by us fans, so I suppose the role is getting the job done. But I also would have preferred for Daniel to have stayed face, but I guess that if that had been the case, he wouldn't have too many more people to feud with. All in all, a fine match, but not terribly captivating. Oh, and just some quick full disclosure, I completely skipped Rollins vs. Ambrose. I've been seeing people say that the whole thing has been ridiculous, and I've seen a clip or two and images of Ambrose's new gear, and I honestly don't want any part of that. It didn't help that I was tired and bored by the time that AJ vs. Daniel came around, so I wasn't having any of it. So I skipped right ahead to the TLC match the following day. And so finally, The Rock... Nah, just kidding. I'm so funny, aren't I? Anyway, and so finally, the reason I put on the pay-per-view to begin with. The first ever women's TLC match. Very historic as a concept, but even more so because of the three women involved. Becky Lynch, the man, the new Stone Cold or CM Punk, and the hottest thing in the entire industry. Asuka, the badass walking weapon that went the better part of 2 years, or was it longer than that, undefeated from NXT to the main roster until WrestleMania. The woman that should have not been taken off of TV to begin with, but she was, and now she's back and at the top like she had never been off of TV to begin with. And Charlotte was there too. The match was, well, a bit tainted for me due to the majority of the rest of the show, but it was a good, entertaining match. It's gonna be remembered for being the first for women and for the fact that Asuka won the fucking title. But with a little help from Ronda, of course, who pushed Becky and Charlotte off of the ladder while they were on it, duking it out. Asuka took advantage, and boom. Again, just like I just said, she's right back at the top like she was never gone. Amazing. This is definitely the way to keep Becky hot, because if you ever heard the pros talk about booking programs such as Jim Cornette and Jim Ross, you know that the hottest face chasing a title keeps them hot. And because of this outcome and the ride we'll be on as we watch Becky try to get her title back, I want to keep watching SmackDown and see what Becky and Asuka are going to do to each other over the title. Great stuff made by the finish, and now they've got me hooked and wanting to tune in, as it should be, right? Whew, oh boy, this took me like 2 fucking hours to write, but I did it! I'd originally done this one podcast style, but it was over an hour long, and I decided that writing it out would be a much better idea, especially since it would greatly reduce the length of the video. I mean, do you really want to hear me drone on for more than an hour? Probably not. What did you think of TLC? Did you agree with all, some, or none of these opinions? Leave a comment. I'm all for nerding out about this stuff, because at the end of the day, I love pro wrestling. If you like more of UBG, check out some of the gaming videos already on the channel. Subscribe for more WWE pay-per-view videos to come in the future, because I honestly don't want to do them weekly, and this is a gaming-centric channel anyway. Also, make sure to check out UBG on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the links in the description. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you here for the next one. And as Pat Patterson and Edge and Christian would do on their podcast when they do impressions of Pat Patterson, here we go.